To the Jake Asman Show on the SportsMap Radio Network.
Presented by Rocket Mortgage.
Live from the O'Reilly Auto Parts Studios, here's Jake Asman.
50 days away from the NFL draft. We know the Jacksonville Jaguars have the first pick. We know they are likely, very, very likely to use that pick on quarterback Trevor Lawrence out of Clemson. But then it gets interesting because the Jets have the second overall pick, and we have no idea what they're going to do. They could trade down. They could trade the pick to the Texans. They could take the second overall pick and turn that into a quarterback. A lot of possibilities, and the draft pretty much starts with the New York Jets. So for more on the NFL draft, we go out to the Progressive guest line right now. We bring on Russell Brown, who is a national scout for Cover1.net. He's also the host of the Cover One NFL Draft podcast, and he joins us right now. Russell, appreciate your time this morning, my friend. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate it, Jake. How you doing?
Hanging in. So obviously you heard me just talk about the Jaguars with that first pick. We all expect them to take Trevor Lawrence. And then the Jets come up with the second overall pick, and there's a lot of unknowns on what they will do. Russell, if you were Joe Douglas, what would you do with that second overall pick?
I would certainly feel like I would be trying to build around Sam Darnold. That's nothing against any of the quarterbacks in this class by any means. I would just, that's a quarterback I took just a few short years ago, and I would want to go out and try to build around him the right way, because I feel like the Jets have done somewhat of a disservice to Sam Darnold. And I was listening to you earlier about the Giants with Sam Darnold, or with Daniel Jones, don't make him into Sam Darnold, so on and so forth. And I agree with that in a sense. Don't give up on this guy, and you need to build around him. And I think when you're in a position that they could trade back and get a hefty haul, essentially maybe a king's ransom for that second overall pick. And they could really build around Darnold and build up that defense, because they're going to have to get players that Robert Saleh needs and wants, and has to utilize the best he can. And if you can do that by getting more assets in this draft, I think that's key, because there's no sure thing in this draft. And it's like that mini draft, but with so much uncertainty this year. I mean, I've never felt more uncertain about really anything in regards to the NFL draft over the last 10 years than this year. For sure. So I think building around Darnold makes a lot of sense. I truthfully think they're going to take somebody like Zach Wilson at number 2, though.
Russell Brown joining us here. So you mentioned Sam Darnold and the Jets staying with him, traded the pick and getting a ton for him. When you compare Darnold to the quarterbacks coming out, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, and all the other ones, how does Sam compare when you evaluate him versus these quarterbacks?
It would be Sam at the top spot over those guys, because I loved that class just from a few years ago with Darnold, Rosen, et cetera. I had Rosen as my top quarterback in that class, and obviously it didn't really pan out the way I thought it would. But I would have Darnold ahead of those guys. I felt like, Darnold just needed some lower body mechanic work done, fixing up some of his footwork, and not necessarily saying that, Adam Gase was the right fit for him. Obviously we saw that, but it just felt like with some NFL coaching that was going to get right. But it's not really panned out to be that way. But I would compare him. Yeah, he'd be the top guy for me in this draft class if he was in it right now. I just thought there was so much to work with, and not anything discrediting these quarterbacks by any means. I mean, Zach Wilson, is he a one-year wonder? What are we going to see moving forward? Can his overall frame handle anything in the NFL compared to what he's faced in college football? And really, Justin Fields is just that complimentary or consolation prize for anybody in the NFL that gets to grab him.
Russell Brown, NFL Draft Analyst, joining us here. You can follow him on Twitter at RussNFLDraft. You mentioned Zach Wilson. It seems like a lot of the draft experts have moved Wilson to that second quarterback spot. It goes Lawrence, then Wilson, and then it seems like there's a debate on where you go from there. Do you see it the same way, Russ? Do you rank Zach Wilson as the second best quarterback in this class?
He is my third ranked quarterback in this class. I love Justin Fields. I think he gets somewhat of a bad rap in a sense for everything. Again, like I said, he's a consolation prize, no doubt about it. And if Trevor Lawrence wasn't in this draft class, if obviously we weren't talking about, Sam Darnold, he would be the top quarterback in the group. But what makes Zach Wilson so intriguing is just the arm angles that he can throw from, the overall accuracy deep down the field. He takes some unnecessary risks, but the ball placement down the field is remarkable. But Justin Fields showed off the toughness. He's mobile. He shows what he can do when things are going right and the script is going right, but then he operates off script so easily. He can run and move in and out of the pocket with ease. So it's really close. I mean, it is really close between the two, but I do believe Justin Fields is the second best quarterback in this class. I just think the home run ability for him is through the roof.
It seems like so many people with Fields forget just how electric he was in that game against Clemson in the college football playoff. I watched that game, Russ, and I'm not the biggest college football fan, but I was locked in to that game. And for him to come back, from the rib injury and end up with 6 touchdowns against that Clemson team, I think that's being poo-pooed a bit, and I don't think it should.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, and that's one of those examples. When he played against Michigan just the year prior, he had hurt his knee, and he still played through that knee injury. And I don't remember the extent of the knee injury, but he played through it and continued playing for the rest of the season for Ohio State. And, you get 2 years of tape of this guy, the limited turnovers, the great just ball security from him. And again, I mentioned the home run threat. Every single time he's got the football in his hands, a touchdown can be scored. And I know that's kind of the feeling with Zach Wilson at times and with, other quarterbacks, but that we've seen in years past. But with Justin Fields, it is no different. So I do think he gets somewhat of a bad rap, the short end of the stick, if you will, compared to other players in this group and other quarterbacks. But once we get through free agency and kind of this quarterback dust settles, we will definitely have, I think, a more clear picture of what teams in the top 10 and in the top 15 will look at in the quarterback position.
Russell Brown with us here. He's on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft, national scout for cover1.net, as we are 50 days away from the NFL draft. So we're breaking it all down here on the Jake Asman Show. Staying with the quarterback conversation, Russell, it seems like there's a great unknown on what Trey Lance is as a prospect, on what Mac Jones is as a prospect. Give me your evaluation on both those quarterbacks.
Trey Lance would be the one ranked ahead of him just simply for the athletic ability, the mobility. I think people forget that Trey Lance ran for over 1,000 yards, did not turn the football over at all at North Dakota State. I don't care what division of football you're playing in. If you don't turn the football over as a quarterback, maybe you just got some luck or you're a good quarterback. And I think it might be a mixture of both. But overall, I think he's just a really good quarterback. He's only 20 years of age. He's going to be 21 going into this season. Somebody that, might need to carry the clipboard for a year, get him in the right spot, maybe Carolina behind Teddy Bridgewater, maybe Atlanta behind Matt Ryan. Those would be 2 great fits for him. Even San Francisco with Jimmy G still there, maybe he could sit for a year and really learn. But with what he can do, the ball just jumps out of his hands with ease. He moves around so quickly, and just the design quarterback runs, whether it's quarterback power with some jet sweep in there, absolutely love it from him. And again, I mentioned the ball just flies out of his hands. He can throw the ball deep down the field with ease. And Mac Jones, look, I like Mac Jones. I don't dislike him. I still think, with the second round grade that I gave him, I think he'll go in the first round. I don't know exactly where, you could see him at 15 to New England. You could see him at the back end in the 20s to maybe New Orleans or something. But I think he will go somewhere in this first round. The biggest question mark is the athletic ability and just the overall arm strength. There is times that he pushes the ball down the field with ease, but there are also times that the ball just kind of flutters out of his hands. And I think really what makes him different and what is his best asset is the anticipation throws. He throws with great anticipation, and he does navigate around the pocket pretty well in structure, but getting him outside of that structure, it's really dicey. So I think Mac Jones could come in, be an adequate starter in the NFL, reminds me a bit of like a Kirk Cousins in a sense. So I think he'll go in the first round. It's just a matter of where, but I would take Trey Lance over Mac Jones just from the ceiling perspective.
Let's stay with offense. This is a loaded wide receiver group. In your mind, Russell, who is the top wide receiver? How would you rank the top guys coming out in this class?
It would be Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, and Jalen Waddle for me. I think Jamar Chase, just what he was able to do 2 years ago. Again, we mentioned people forget about Justin Fields, Trey Lance, etc. I think people forget about how talented Jamar Chase really was. We can credit Joe Burrow and Joe Brady and the offense that they ran at LSU, but Jamar Chase still had to come down with those plays. He had to make those plays. And what he can do with the football in his hands, I think is just as electric as any receiver in this draft. He's a deep threat down the field. He can operate in and out of the slot. I think, truthfully, you can get him as an X receiver, and he can be an absolute dog in the NFL. I love his skill set, and it would not surprise me by any means if he ended up actually being the third overall pick in the draft to Miami if they don't trade back. But I think he's a top 5 pick waiting to go. It's just who's it going to be and who's going to take him.
Where do you see Kyle Pitts going?
That's such an interesting question, because I said back in August that this guy had an it factor, and I kind of got ridiculed on Twitter about what's an it factor. This guy doesn't have it. Now everybody's saying he's possibly the best tight end we've ever seen come out of the draft, and I don't disagree there. I think he is very talented. He's certainly a top 10 pick. Again, it wouldn't surprise me if a team like Atlanta, maybe they go all in on this window that they possibly have with Matt Ryan, and they upgrade over Hayden Hurst, and they bring in Kyle Pitts with Julio on the back end of his career. You've got Calvin Ridley. Russell Gage has been really nice. So maybe that's something that they consider with Arthur Smith. Now they're running the show. Maybe that's something they consider, getting a very dynamic move tight end that can play outside as an X receiver. He can be an inline blocker. He's not great at it, but he gives his best effort every single time. And you can give effort all day long. You can fix technique. So I love it. I think he's a top 5 player in this class without a doubt.
Russell Brown joining us here, National Scout, cover1.net. Also check out his podcast. He's the host of the Cover One NFL Draft podcast. 50 days till the draft. How about a bold prediction, Russell? Which team do you think is going to trade up to get a quarterback when it's all said and done?
Man, put me on the spot here. I'm going to say Carolina. I think Carolina, just the way that they've done, and this might be the easy answer. I think Carolina, though. I think the way that they've been looking at the quarterback position, they've been very heavily interested in quarterbacks. Their goal, I think, will try to be to get up into maybe 4 or 5 and try to jump in before Philadelphia, Detroit, just simply because, they both have their quarterbacks, but there is uncertainty. It's odd that Philadelphia said we're not looking at a quarterback, and you can't really buy into that. And Jared Goff, what is he? Is he really just a 2-year rental? What could he be? So I think Carolina will want to try to make sure they get one of the 4 quarterbacks that are worthy of really that top 10, top 15 conversation. And so I think that they will be the team that trades up.
Do you think that there's going to be 5 quarterbacks that go in the first round? And how many do you think will be in the top 10?
I think we'll see 4 in the top 10, and I think we could potentially see 5 within the top 20.
Wow.
You look at Washington, you look at New England, potentially Chicago. So I think when you look just the teams that need a quarterback, it just makes too much sense for teams looking to get a quarterback. I think there's just way too much there. San Francisco, again, I mentioned New England. So I think there's so many teams that I think are uncertain with the quarterbacks. Once we get through free agency, this dust settles a little bit. We'll definitely have a lot more clear picture, but I think we'll see 5 in the top 20.
He's Russell Brown. Follow him on Twitter at RussNFLDraft, National Scout, cover1.net. Check out his podcast, Cover One NFL Draft Podcast. Russell, great insight. Thanks so much for coming on. And it's crazy, 50 days away from the draft. We'll definitely get you back on the show and continue to break it all down as we get a little closer.
Appreciate it, Jake. Take care, my man. We will talk soon.
Absolutely. Russell Brown joining us there on our progressive guest line, 50 days away from the NFL Draft on April